Welcome to the Spiritual Regression Show with Renna on moretalk.tv. My name is Renna, and I'm the Director of Divine Aspect, a therapy practice based in Dorset, UK, focusing on life coaching, regression therapy, life between life therapy, and hypnotherapy. As of late, children recalling past lives have been more and more popular. Child regression therapy is a highly specialized field where therapists help children access past memories in altered states to help get to the source of a challenge to heal and enable the child to move forward in their lives. These memories include past life, current life, and birthing ones. Christine Alisa is a therapist who has worked with children, adolescents, and their families for over 25 years. She is a marriage family therapist with a private practice in Southern California. An international speaker, trainer, and author of Turning the Hourglass, Chris has taught regression therapy in India, Europe, and Brazil. She specializes with children and adolescents and has developed a process that combines Gestalt and regression therapy to release such issues as attention deficit disorder, anxiety, and depression. Hello, Christine. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Renna, for having me.
So, Christine, I'd just like you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you came upon this process of helping children and adolescents through regression therapy and Gestalt therapy.
Yes, well, I started off my career as a teacher, and I worked with children at the elementary school age. And I found that I was running across children that had different problems, and there was no way I could really help them as a teacher. So I was very frustrated. So I decided to go back to school and become a marriage family therapist. So I began working and training in that field, and I discovered that I was very interested in working with children, and I kept getting those cases. So I did some training with a woman named Dr. Violet Oaklander, who works with children and adolescents. And I really loved the way that she approached the child and respected the child, and her techniques just fit for me. And then I became interested in regression therapy. So I studied that, and I worked with adults. And I started thinking, well, how can I combine these? How can I do the regression with the child? Is there a way I can do that? So I developed a process using both of those techniques to help children with some deep traumas, or maybe things they'd forgotten in their early childhood or prenatal birth, and what we call past lives, but what I often describe as just a metaphor or a story. And I use that with the child. I use it as a story, not as something that, because the child is sensitive, and so I work within that framework. So I developed this process that I use now with children.
Could you briefly tell us what sorts of techniques you learned through Dr. Violet?
Yes, I used many different kinds of mediums that she taught us. Mediums being clay. We use just regular potter's clay, which is really magical with the children, and sand tray work, which is using sand and also figures that they put in the sand and make a story. We use puppets, we use drawing, we use dramatic creative play. So I sort of have a whole room full of things that I use. So the mediums, and then also what she does is, it's called Gestalt, but what it means is that when you do a story or something with a child, or they're doing something with clay and they make figures, then you ask them, okay, if you were one of these figures, could you talk to me? Just kind of talk to me, like a puppet would talk to me. So in other words, the child has a little distance from what the issue might be, and the figure is speaking for her, just like a puppet would be talking and saying, "Oh, I'm kind of sad today," but it's not the child. So I learned a lot about having respect for the child's boundaries and to give them that distance and safety. I learned a lot about how to work with their resistance, because children may or may not want to do what you want to do, and how to kind of flow with that, to what I call do a dance with the child, to develop a relationship, because the work I do is built on that. It's built on trust, creating safety and trust before they're really going to talk about things that really bother them.
Because they have to be really comfortable with you, don't they, before they actually open up to you?
Right. Yeah. That's as comfortable as they can be in a situation like that. You want to just make it fun and enjoyable. So we do a lot of games. I give them choices. It's important they also feel control, because a lot of times in children's lives, they don't feel control. All the adults have the control. And so they want it, but they act out, or they have symptoms and behaviors that the parents are going, "Oh, I don't know what to do with this." And that's their only way of saying, "I need some control. I have something going on, but, pay attention to me." So I work a lot with giving them that sense that I'm an adult, but I'm not in the power role. There's a shift in that.
Right. Okay. So, what symptoms can regression therapy and Gestalt therapy help children with?
Well, I found that symptoms such as depression, which does exist in children and adolescents, also anxiety, fears. A lot of children have fears. Separation anxiety is a big one. We work with attention deficit disorder, where there's variations in that. They may be not paying attention at school, or they may be all the way on the end of really hyperactive. But it's regression therapy is very helpful for that, because what I found is that a lot of these issues or symptoms have what we call patterns. And those patterns can be like, for instance, a child that has attention deficit disorder, usually they want to move. They want to move all the time. They're kind of looking around the classroom, or they want to be active on the move. And what we find in regression therapy is that we go to some past experience where they couldn't move. In other words, where they didn't have that control, they didn't have that freedom. And unfortunately, that's usually a place where they felt stuck, or they were helpless, they couldn't do something about it. And so when we kind of unloosen that story, because as children tell me the story of where they felt stuck or trapped or couldn't move, whether that's, something that happened with them in an earlier experience, once we get that out, it loosens it. It's like we take out the glue that has kept them stuck, and then they're able to feel less stuck, and the movement isn't so needed. They don't have to be so, distracted or so moving around. They learn their patterns about that. So it helps
just
a
to
lot.
clarify, so through regression therapy, the symptoms that were labeled as attention deficit disorder can be eradicated?
Well, I found that they have been, yes. Yes, in my experience, they have. And
Right.
so, and of course, it depends on the case, because if the parent is willing to keep their child in therapy until I have finished with that issue, yes, then it goes away.
Right.
There are instances where I've worked with children, and they can only work a certain time period based on their developmental level. So, like, for example, I had a girl that was about 9 years old when she came to me, and she did a lot of work, and she had to do a lot of past life, or what we call metaphor work, because she was attention deficit disorder. And what happened was that she got to a point where she was feeling happy. She was very, very confident in school. She was getting good grades. The teacher was working with her. Everything was really going well. And I really, there was no need for me to push her anymore, though there was still some uh, issue with it. It took her a long time to take tests. But she really didn't want to move anymore with it. That was all for that developmental level. So it felt successful. But she came back when she was about 15 because she was having some trouble in high school where the work was a little more challenging. And so she had some test anxiety. And some of that attention deficit sort of creeped up. So we had to work with it again because she was at that level that she could.
Right. That's interesting. And you work with children, just coming back to developmental levels, you've worked with children from the age of 2 all the way to adolescents. Is there a difference in the way that you work with them?
Yes. Oh, yes. There's a difference between the very young children and then all the way up to the adolescents. There's quite a wide range of difference. When I work with the little children, I often have the parent in the room. This is something usually the child wants, maybe not for the whole session or for the whole therapy, but a lot of them feel much more secure with their parent in the room. And sometimes it's necessary for the work. I worked with a little boy who um, he was 2.5, and he'd had a very difficult birth. It was an emergency C-section. The cord had been wrapped around his neck, and it was the parents gave me the information that he almost died. And he really was a very depressed little boy, just very sad, would never smile. And when the parents brought him, I decided to use the regression work, but also to use another technique that I call holding time, which is where I had the parents in the room. And I have these sand trays, and I had them sit on one side of the sand tray and I on the other. And I reenacted the birth from what the parents had told me. Plus, he had some surgeries as well. And they were kind of holding him lovingly, telling him how they loved him, how he was safe now. It was all over. I was coaching them to do this. It was a case where this boy was very traumatized by even going back to the doctor. He had another surgery he had to have, and he was just, he was so emotionally upset that it was almost like we had to do something very, very strong to get him through this. And as I worked the regression using my technique in the sand, and the parents were holding him, it took about 3 or 4 sessions. And he went from being depressed, not even wanting to walk or talk, he was barely crawling, to big smile and happy to see me and wanting to play and trying to stand. And he was getting some physical therapy to help him because he was a little delayed. There was nothing wrong with him organically, but it was a real birth trauma. And so in that case, with a small child, I needed the parents there to help me create what I call a positive shift, so that he now has no, what I call baggage left from that experience, and he
So,
can move on.
sorry, I was just going to say what I found interesting is that with this little boy, you measured the effectiveness of the therapy via his body language because he couldn't articulate verbally what had happened to him, what was happening to him, and how it had impacted him.
Right, right. Just total body language, and also his. There were children naturally. The only way when they can't speak, like babies, they cry. I mean, that's the natural way of things. So he did some crying. That was his communication. But once he was able to cry it out, parents know that when their kid cries it out after they have a fall and skin their knee and they cry, and then they're fine. That was really kind of what this was. It was just crying it out until he was finished. And then his body language changed. But,
Sorry, I was going to go on.
well, I was going to say then with a little bit older children, the work is different. In other words, they are able to play with me, talk with me. I'm able to engage them, and we do many activities together, and we can do my process where they can kind of help me. And then adolescents are a bit different because they may not want to use the clay or the sand tray, and they have different kinds of resistance. But they're all really very delightful to work with, too. It's just a little different.
How long does it take, on average, to help a child through a challenge? Does it take several weeks, several years?
Well, it really depends on the case. If there's a situation where there's been abuse, and those cases always take longer. They take longer in traditional therapy. I believe that in regression therapy it goes faster. But those cases, they may be once a week or once every other week for a year or two,
Right.
depending on the situation. Other cases, they could be a few months. Some cases, the child has a few sessions and they're done.
Right.
It really, really varies. What I try to do is give the parents what I call an evaluation. In other words, I see the child and then I say, okay, well, I think it's probably going to take this many sessions, or it may take a while, and I always educate the parents along the way about the process.
So why is educating the parents so important within this process?
Because what happens in the course of the therapeutic process is the child that came in with certain symptoms and behaviors, those symptoms and behaviors may actually get a little bit worse before they get better. And I know that really upsets parents because they go, "Oh, I thought you were going to help my child," and now they seem to be regressed, and they're wetting the bed again or some. And that doesn't always happen, but it does happen in cases where there's been a lot of trauma. So I educate the parents about, okay, this is just going to happen for a while and then it will be over. But it's the child going back into the situation that caused it in the first place, and kind of going into those feelings a little bit deeper. And I also educate the parents on how to communicate with their child, how to listen to them, to really hear them and what's going on with them, and educate them about kind of the work that we're doing. I have to describe what I call my storytelling technique so that they understand that it's regression therapy, that there's going back into a situation that perhaps a traditional therapist wouldn't do. Like I had a girl that her biological mother was an alcoholic, and she was no longer in the mother's custody. She was 11 when she came to me, and her father had custody of her. So the father and the stepmother brought her in, and I was like the third therapist that they had brought her to, and she was just getting worse. So they said, okay, we'll try regression therapy because they were so distraught. This girl was ADHD. She was on a lot of medications. She just had dark circles around her eyes. She was not thriving. And one of the things that happened that her birth mother used alcohol during the prenatal. And so I had to explain to the parents that I'm going to have to go back into prenatal and I'm going to have to work with that experience with your daughter because she's carrying that with her. She's carrying not only the experience of her mother's emotions, but the effect of being numbed out with alcohol and some early childhood work. So I often have to educate them about this is why we do it, to separate the child from maybe a bad experience that's held in their cells.
So, how do you manage the whole issue of confidentiality? Because at the end of the day, your client is the child. And as you said, they have to feel really comfortable with you, they have to really trust you. But then you've also got the parents to manage. So, how do you balance that?
Well, like most countries, we have a law here, and I have to follow the law of confidentiality, which means that I cannot tell the parents what the child is talking about with me unless it's something that is, life-threatening, like they're going to hurt somebody else or somebody has molested them or hurt them. That's the only time I can break confidentiality. But I explain to the parents, and I also have them sign my policies that state that I can't tell them what the child has said, and that I would appreciate that they do not, ask the child what the session was about, so that the child doesn't seem pressured and doesn't have to say, oh, this happened, we did this. So that has to be established right away. And then I tell the child those things that I'm not allowed to tell. I'll say, well, if you want to tell your parent and they haven't asked you and you feel comfortable, you can tell them. I mean, there's many a times I've had a child they've made a sand tray scene and it was a past life or something, and they want their parent to come in and see it, because they want the parent to see what they're working on and what they're doing. Um, I don't, when I'm working with the parent and I'm talking about their child, what I'm doing is talking about the issues. I'm not talking about what the child is saying, but I'm saying there are some issues. For instance, the girl with the alcoholic mother. Okay, we are pulling out some issues coming from that prenatal, and you may notice that she'll have a little bit different behavior. She might numb out or space out. So just be cognizant of that and know that that's part of that. And maybe you can just ask her to breathe. Sometimes I give parents some techniques of things to do with their child to help along, because the therapy works best when the parents are involved and they can start understanding what's going on.
Right. So there is a very tight balance, though, isn't there, of how much they need to be involved and how much we leave the space for the child. That's interesting. You also said that you engage the parent more. The parents are there during the session when the child is, say, 2 or 3. When do you stop the parent being there at the session? At what age does the child have to be when you stop that?
Well, in general, I try to make it 5, because by that time, 5 years old, they've gone to school, kindergarten, and they've already been away from their parent. And so I generally say, can we just have your mom sit in the waiting room. She'll be right out the door. You can peek out when you want to. From about 5 years old and up is usually when I feel it's best to kind of have the parent not in the room.
Do you normally give the parent regression therapy?
Oh, yes, often.
Yes.
Yes.
And in what circumstance do you do that?
As I'm getting to know the parents and I'm getting to know the situation of the child and I'm working with them and I'm doing all this educating, the parent starts to talk about their difficulties. And so it might be their difficulties with a child. It might even be their difficulties in their relationship. And so I say, well, why don't we schedule an appointment? So I start working with a parent. Sometimes I refer a parent out to another colleague, and maybe I work with one of the parents, they work with another. Sometimes I work with both parents. It really varies on the family and how I really feel would be the best situation. But I find that if the parents can work on their issues, it just absolutely brings the most incredible growth for the family. I've often told the children that, they're the first client, they come in and they work on it, and pretty soon their brother is coming to see me, or maybe their father came in, and I'll say, whoa, you started all this, you're the leader. And it really feels good for them because when parents are able to really get down to the things that have blocked them from their own ability to be happy or connect real well with their family, that just engages the child more. And I often tell parents, the better you are, the better your child will be. So I really find it very helpful.
Right. Thank you, Christine. We'll be back after the break with more from Christine Alisa.
Healing the Eternal Soul is a book sprinkled with case examples that makes it an invaluable resource for those who assist others in achieving contact with their eternal part. It lends hope to those whose lives are stuck or riddled with painful residuals from past lives. More so, it's an incredibly interesting read.
The Past Life Regression Academy teaches hypnosis, past life regression, regression therapy, and life between lives regression internationally. Hundreds of students have been through the Academy training program and have successful practices. This is because of the amazing results they get and the referrals that come from it. For more information, see the Regression Academy website.
Welcome back. We are joined by Christine Alisa, a family therapist and also a child regression therapist specialist. Christine, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Christine, I just would like to ask you, at the start of the program, you mentioned a case study where you had a little girl whose symptom emerged again when she was an adolescent, and you do mention this as well in your book, Turning the Hourglass. I just wanted to know why this happens.
Well, their children grow and they go through certain stages that we call developmental stages. And those stages have been divided up, so to speak, into sort of age blocks. So at certain ages, the child can manage a certain kind of process, and then they move to the next one, and they move to the next one. And at each sort of block of probably around 2 years, they are growing. Their brain is growing. Their ability to, like sometimes the younger children can do what we only call concrete operations. That means everything's concrete, it's physical, it's right in front of them. And as they get older, they are able to analyze and have concepts more. And then the adolescent brain is developing, and they're moving into a developmental stage where they're working with somewhat of their impulse control issues. So you have different stages, and at those different stages, when you're working with the child, you keep that in mind because they only can go and do a certain amount of therapeutic work, and then it won't be effective anymore because it's only what they can do at that point, and that's still successful. But for instance, a child that came to me that I saw when he was 10 and 11 years old, and he did a lot of work, and he'd been abused by his biological mother, and so there was a lot of trauma work. And he got to a point where he was feeling very strong, and he had a lot of self-confidence, and he didn't really need to do anything more. And he was at a level where he felt very successful. He's doing well in school and so forth. But then when he was about 19 years old, he came back to see me again because he was stimulated by an experience that he had. And the experience was that he wanted to go into the Navy, and they were putting him through diving lessons. And he was having a lot of trouble going really deep and diving. He was getting really scared, and it was bothering him because this was one of his goals in life. So at that point, he was ready to do almost really close to adult regression work, and we found a past life where he had been he'd been drowned with a torture kind of experience. So he was able to process that at that age, but I would never have suggested anything like that when he was younger. It just wouldn't be appropriate. So sometimes what happens is that the older ages and teenage years, new issues crop up. Their hormones are changing. They're going into independence, which is part of that developmental stage. And yet they're also needing their parents. So it's a big push-pull for them. And issues can come up that really would never have come up earlier. But they are able to handle them now. So that's how it works.
So could we argue then it is better to start working with a person from a certain age instead of working at such a young age? What is the advantage of starting to work at such a young age?
Well, the child has a happier life. In other words, this is one of my goals. They're happier, they feel more confident. They're not carrying around this baggage. Or what I tell the children all the time is, you've got a backpack on your back, and it's all this old stuff. And we just want to lift it off. That's all we want to do. And once we lift it off, you're freer to have this happy life, not depressed or worried about things. And once they have that, it enables them to have a chance to have a more profitable or productive adulthood. And so I think one of my passions about working with children is that it gives them a chance that a lot of people don't have to take advantage of life and all that it can give us. And because I work with so many adults as well, and we end up doing a lot of childhood trauma, but they've already spent years being unhappy or difficult relationships or whatever. So I think it's been this feeling that why don't we help a child to clear these things so they can function and do well in life?
I think that's a great argument. In all your 25 years as working as a therapist, have you come across any risks of using regression therapy in working with children?
No, I've not. No
No.
risk.
Because I have heard sometimes parents or adults say that children block traumatic memories to cope and continue living. But then when they go through regression therapy, it will be giving them access to these emotions. So in your experience, has this been too much for children to cope with?
Well, as I said before, when I work with children, I'm developing a relationship. I'm working with always seeing how they're doing. I'm very, what we call client-centered. That means I'm looking at the child and what they can handle at all times. For instance, I had a girl that had been molested by a family friend, and she had to go to the courts. She had to be interviewed by police, and she was almost re-traumatized. Oh, there's the fire engine. You heard that? We've got a fire engine going down the road. Anyway, so she was very traumatized, not only by the abuse, but by being interviewed so often. So when she came to me, she did not want to talk about any of it. And she did not want to go into the regression work at all. So I spent a lot of the therapy doing self-support work, which meant we did a lot of anger work. She was angry at all the people that were interviewing her. She was angry at kids at school, whatever. And we were able to, and we used puppets a lot, to strengthen her and get her to a place where one day she said to me, "It's okay, we can talk about him." And so we went into the sand tray and we made the scene, and she told me what happened. Some of it she remembered and some of it she didn't. So I'm not re-traumatizing children. I am trying to work with where they are and just bring it in as much as they can handle, because children don't have the, the defense mechanisms that we have. They can't just go into denial quickly like we can. They don't have that. So they have their resistance, which means I don't want to do that, or I'm not ready. So I honor that. And what that does, it says to the child, okay, they're in charge. So when they're ready, they can tell me. So I'm always doing that in the sessions with children. In other words, when I find that we're maybe in a scene and we're talking about something and I see them looking around the room or they're pulling away, I just say, okay, is this a time to stop? Yeah. And you can tell me at any time we can stop. So I don't put them at risk. I try to keep them feeling safe and going at their own pace.
Got it. Thank you. And I think something else I've heard people mention is this thing about the false memory syndrome. I've heard children can be really susceptible, and so a memory may come up, not because it's a genuine memory, but because it's been implanted in them. So can you say something about this?
Yes, there's a difference in what I call the affect of the child. If it's something they've heard and they've been told to tell me, or if it's something in their imagination, versus a memory, a memory from their unconscious. The affect differences are usually in the way the child looks at me, the way their mannerisms, and also if there's any feeling involved. If sometime, children are imaginative. That's part of who they are. So a lot of the things that may come up may be part from their imagination. But when they work with the regression part and we get into my storytelling technique, if I sense and feel their emotions, if their emotions are coming up, maybe it's anger or some fear, or sometimes they'll have a body reaction where they kind of jump, like I had a little boy who we were working with his, when he was in prenatal, and his parents were fighting. And there was some physical fighting and some verbal fighting. And when we were making the scene, he actually jumped. He physically jumped. And when there's that kind of reaction, that's really difficult for a child to make up. That's not something they can do. But if, if a parent has sort of what I call programmed a child, in other words, they come in and say, now tell the therapist this, then that kind of thing is very different because it doesn't have a lot of emotion to it. It's kind of stark and blank. And when I work with children and we go into scenes that maybe are from the past, and I have these emotions come up, and we are able to delve deeper into it, then that's different from making up something or being told what to say. So I'm aware that children do that. I work with children and know what they do. So what I really stress is that if they go through the therapy, they do these sessions, and they feel better, they're happier, they're not doing some of the same behaviors, then if it was all imagination, fine. I'm thankful. It worked. I'm not here to debate that. If it worked, then if it was all imagination, fine with me.
Got it.
I just want them happier.
And if we touched on a sensitive issue of, say, maybe child abuse, have you had an experience? In your experience, has a child ever told you a lie about being abused, for example, to get some attention or for whatever reason?
That hasn't happened to me because usually my cases they come to me and there's already been allegations of abuse. But I did, on occasion, they do, talk about the abuse for the first time in my sessions. But I always err on the side of believing the child. In other words, if they say they've been molested, I believe it. And I have to go forward in that direction, reporting it, so forth, working with the parents, the authorities, the social workers, all of that, and then work with it in the sessions. Yes, I suppose there are children who lie about it, but then I have to go deeper and say, well, what would be the reasons they'd be lying? In other words, if they're wanting attention, why are they wanting attention? What's going on in the family that they're not getting attention? Why would they go to such extremes? In other words, there must be something going on that we need to find out if it's not that, if it's not abuse, what is it? It might be something else. And so I'm always looking at believing them, but also let's go to what is that abuse and what happened there.
And how would it impact the parents in that case?
Yes, well, of course, it's always very difficult for the family, especially when allegations first come out about abuse. I worked with a girl who, I guess she was about 8 years old, and her mother brought her in, and she was ADHD and just very hyperactive. And as we were working, and I would start asking her questions, she was very confused all the time. Just, I don't know, she would say. I don't know why I feel that. I don't know why I'm doing this. And so I asked her to go under the confusion. And when I did that, she said, Oh, well, my father is touching me in my private places. Well, this is the first time that come out in the family, so I had to go out to the waiting room, bring her mother in. I spoke to her mother, spoke to her about what I was going to have to do. I had another session with her mother, and of course, it was very traumatic for the mother. She, it's always amazing. People don't, are so shocked, but that happens. Families go into a kind of crisis around those allegations. And so I think it's very important that families get into therapy, whether it's with me or somebody else, because I think it is such a disturbing subject, especially if it's somebody within the family. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is. It's all very difficult. I mean, I've had cases where I had a girl who was molested by her teacher, and she had to end up going to court and testifying against him. So I had the family in. We did a lot of family therapy. I worked with each family member. I worked with her, helping them to give some support to deal with all this, absolute just thrusts of emotion from all over the place. So it's very important that the families, get help, because it will strengthen the child and they'll feel the support to go through these very difficult experiences. But yes, it's it can be very disturbing to everybody, but it's workable. And I always say to families, this is workable. Yes, it's trauma. Yes, it's heart-wrenching. Yes, there's a lot of emotion involved, but we're going to work it through. And this particular girl that I work with, I mean, she was just fabulous. She went to court, she testified against him, and it gave her this strength. I worked a lot with her on that. We practiced a lot of how to be in the courtroom too. So, it's life throws us these things, and if we can work through them, we can heal them.
Thank you. And you mentioned a lot about your clients who have ADHD or ADD and how regression therapies help them. What other symptoms or labels can child regression therapy help with? For example, how about learning disability? Or you've mentioned earlier as well about separation anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I think learning disability is, I've worked with children with learning disabilities, and I find it really interesting because depending upon the learning disability, for instance, what I've worked with is visual, where children cannot, maybe the letters jump around the page when they're reading, or maybe they can't focus their eyes together and coordinate to see. Learning disabilities run the gamut. They're on a continuum from maybe mild going up to severe. When I work with children with learning disabilities, I always ask for them to also get some extra help. In other words, whether that's tutors, whether that is specialists and therapists that work with learning disabilities, working with the school. I mean, it's sort of a group project, all of us. It's like a village. But I had a girl who had a visual disability, and her eyes were not working together. So she really, to concentrate and to read was so difficult because they were jumping around. And I recommended that her parent take her to vision therapy, which is where they actually work with the muscles and to develop them so they coordinate together. So she worked with that therapist, and the parent did exercises with her. So it's like you have to do the physical part. Like, remember I told you the little boy that wasn't crawling, he still needed physical therapy. So, we kind of work together as a team to heal the child. But in this case, when I work with this girl, what I found is that she had a past life where um, she had she had wanted to read in this particular community where she was, but she wasn't allowed to read. So it was like these patterns occur where old thoughts, old things from the past can actually come into our life here and now. So when she would sit down to read, it was like this message saying, oh, you can't read. You're not supposed to read. She also had a lifetime where she had a learning disability again. So I found when we did a lot of the past life work and with her vision therapy, she just seemed to move through the whole thing and the learning disability went away. My daughter also had a very similar situation. She had a learning disability and she had to go to vision therapy, and she also had to have some past life sessions. So, and some prenatal birth issues. So I feel that regression therapy is really helpful in tandem with other kinds of expert help, just like in speech therapy too. You know, we have children who stop talking or they start stuttering or something at a certain age, and it's emotional based, but they still need, you know, the help of the speech therapist.
Fascinating. So just moving it on a little bit, I have a friend whose daughter, when the daughter was 4 years old, kept telling my friend, my other mother said I can do this, and my other mother said that I can have this. What are your thoughts and opinions of spontaneous past life recollection? And what is your advice to parents whose children start speaking about other mothers or another house or another situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I always find those spontaneous memories just delightful usually, because the child just comes up with them, and it's like they're so connected to this past experience, and they're just speaking as if they're still there, and it's very sweet. So I find them interesting. I think that for a parent, basically to take it seriously and go, oh yeah, oh, your other mother, oh wow, well, what was your other mother like? You know, or see if you can get any more information, or just listen and go, oh, it's really interesting. That was then, and this is now. You know, it's really fun because it seems like young children do that. You know, 4 years old, 3, 4 years old is kind of the time that they do that. However, there are some children that have spontaneous memories that are it's more severe, more trauma-based. There's been a lot of recorded cases of children in my country that have had spontaneous memories, but they also are accompanied by a lot of nightmares, maybe crying, and they draw pictures repeatedly of this past life. And the parents are pretty overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. And, there's a program in our country, a documentary program called Ghost Within My Child, and they've been recording a lot of these cases where children have had spontaneous memories, but they're based in places where we've had trauma in this country. Like there was a boy who was in 9/11, and he was in one of the towers, and he had memory of the fire and jumping out of the building, and he was very traumatized. So in those cases, I advise parents to get therapy for that child, to help them process that past life, because the child doesn't know how to do all that. They don't know how to figure that out. All they can do is just tell you what's coming up for them. But a therapist could help them move it through it and then, let it go so it doesn't bother them anymore. Often parents can help them with that as well. It depends upon how involved the parents want to get. But I feel that it's very important that be processed because the children are just opening up something for you to listen to. It's like when children have symptoms or different behaviors or even spontaneous memories, they're trying to tell us there's something wrong. Will you pay attention? There is something wrong. So we're here to help, but there is a process that can help the children with those spontaneous memories to clear them. So I feel it's important to do that.
Thank you. So I guess my last questions would be, how would people get in touch with people like you who specialize in child regression therapy? Where could they go to get more information?
Well, if they go to my website, I do have lists of organizations where I've done some trainings and over around the world. So there's some information there, or they can email me and I can see if I can connect them with any therapists that I know or organizations. It's still kind of a budding field, so to speak. It's new. It's not, there are a lot of child therapists and some that are very qualified to be able to do with this work. So I think more and more therapists are getting used to a process of regression and can help them through. So it's a matter of finding a therapist that's very qualified that can work with a child in their area.
Right. Thank you so much, Christine, for joining us. Your passion in working with children and adolescents really comes through. So thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Renna. This was a delight. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That's all the time we have for this show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. For more information on Christine Alisa, please visit peacethroughmetamorphosis.com. For more information on the Past Life Regression Academy, please visit regressionacademy.com. For more information on me, please visit divineaspect.com. Until the next time, thanks for watching.
Have you ever wondered what happens after death? Deep hypnosis opens up the most amazing soul memories of a spirit world that awaits us all. Follow the fascinating journey of 15 ordinary people in the book Exploring the Eternal Soul, who have been regressed beyond a past life into the afterlife.
The Past Life Regression Academy teaches hypnosis, past life regression, regression therapy, and life between lives regression internationally. Hundreds of students have been through the Academy training program and have successful practices. This is because of the amazing results they get and the referrals that come from it. For more information, see the Regression Academy website